Elon Musk says Doge is saving billions, but the numbers don't quite add up. New York Times reports that for the second time in a week, Musk's group has deleted hundreds more claims from its, quote, wall of receipts, erasing $4 billion in savings they made, or they say they made, for taxpayers. And on the agency's mission to root out fraud, the Washington Post finds it hasn't been able to point to much fraud at all. The Post's Philip Bump puts it bluntly, the point of this exercise, it's safe to assume, is not cost-cutting, but to decimate government so that Trump can rebuild it to his liking. To some extent, Musk is running a con. Joining us now, Washington Post national columnist Philip Bump. Phil, really good to have you. They're putting up all these numbers, and then they're erasing the numbers, and then they're putting up more numbers. Sometimes they're adding something up 3 times. They're overestimating a contract. They're claiming a contract cancellation saves money when it doesn't, in fact, save any money. Is there anything that they've been able to do so far that does save taxpayers money, that is an example of fraud?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's important to consider those two questions separately, right? Have they done things that might save taxpayers money? Assuming we're talking about federal spending as being a tax savings, then yes, it seems clear that if you cancel contracts wantonly, then you're going to save on money that you would have spent on those contracts. Of course, when we talk about cost savings, you and I can save money by not paying our rent or our mortgage, right? There's a downside, which is that we lose our house. So, when we talk about savings, it's very easy to simply not pay bills. The challenge is, what are you doing that for? What are you paying for in the first place? And what's the net loss for taxpayers? Then on the other side, we have this idea of fraud and waste. So far, what we've seen from Musk's group is not that they are uncovering fraud and waste in the traditional sense of, like the $6,000 hammer or whatever it was during the Clinton administration, where it was obviously the case that you could get something cheaper, but the costs were being ballooned. We're not seeing that. What we're seeing instead is examples of contracts being ended that do not align with the right-wing politics of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And so when they're talking about waste and fraud, the only examples that they're pointing to are examples that play to their base of things that their base doesn't like, not actually necessarily waste on the part of the government.
But this is also what they're pointing to when they're talking about their budget deal. And part of the way that they're going to save taxpayers money and not add to the deficit, give them tax breaks, but not add to the deficit and not cut into, Medicare and Social Security, is because they're going to save so much money in fraud. Could they save so much money in fraud? Is there enough fraud in the federal government to be uncovered to get them to that number?
Well, it's important to remember we used to have people who did a diligent job of trying to uncover that fraud. These were the inspectors general. These were the committees in the House that were tasked with actual oversight that actually used to do oversight over the government. And now we don't have that same sort of rigorous mechanism in place, in part because Donald Trump fired the inspectors general, in part because the oversight committees run by Republicans who are mostly focused on targeting Democrats. And so we don't have people who are actually looking for those things. So it's hard to say how much fraud and waste there is. Of course, there is some money that is being spent that doesn't need to be spent. Like, no one can say that you're spending, $8 trillion and none of that is unwarranted. The challenge is it's akin to the conversation you were just having about RFK. Yes, people agree that the government health system isn't necessarily working right, but RFK is coming in and just blowing the whole thing up. It's not as though he has a mechanism for fixing it. That's the same approach that Elon Musk is taking to government spending. Yes, there are certainly examples where we're probably spending more than we ought to, but instead of going through a deliberate process to uncover that, we're going and blowing everything up. And Elon Musk is doing so largely because he can then put it on X, the social media platform, and get a lot of retweets and shares.
I want to put up what we just had on the screen, the numbers claimed saved and then the numbers that were actually saved. So this ICE contract that they said was worth $8 billion, actual worth was $8 million. So from a B to an M. It's a big difference. USAID
1,000 times, right?
Yeah, USAID contract nearly $2 billion. It's actually just $18 million. The Social Security Administration $232 million, actually just $560,000. Those are incredibly off numbers. There's a giant disparity between those two numbers. How do they get to $8 billion when it's $8 million? Is it just a typo?
Yeah, in that case, it's believed it actually was a typo, that there was either they had scanned the information wrong or they're looking at an old version of the contract that was erroneous that added those 3 extra zeros to it. So yeah, in some cases that is it. In other cases, as you noted at the top of the segment, you talked about the fact that, they were counting things that had already been paid as savings because, if there's a contract for 10 years and you've already paid 9 years of it, they're saying they ended the contract and claiming the entire amount that had been spent. It is both sloppiness and overeagerness to try and show a big number that's leading to this, when at the same time there's no reason to do it this fast, right? Like, I think it's really important to come back to that point. Like, there is a way to do this where you're actually being careful and attentive and not just firing people willy-nilly and not just slashing contracts by doing a keyword search in the actual documentation and being deliberate about it. But that's not the approach that they're taking. And so no one should have any confidence in any of this, that they're actually finding something that meets the putative standard that they set, because they've not gone through a process that would mean that they would be able to do that.
Phil Bump, really good to have you. Thank you very much.